Thank you. I have only a few things to say that are going to be different from what everyone else here has already talked about. And it's been an inspiring day with a lot of great information and great stories that I hope have given you a lot of good takeaways. But I'll give you a little bit of information about my own personal journey in terms of my career. But more importantly, I want to also share some information about important things that need to happen with the transformation of the electric grid and what that really means in terms of where there are opportunities, where we need really good problem solvers to help us ensure that we have a grid that's going to be viable into the future. So my title here is Making the Smart Grid Smart. So I don't know how many of you have a definition of the smart grid, or how many of you have ever thought really about how the grid has come to be. But it's an incredible story of a machine that's been called the greatest invention of the 20th century. And so I come at this from the perspective of my own career in telecommunications. And like some other women here have talked about today, my own personal transformation occurred back in 2008. The telecom business has always been one that is kind of a bloodbath every time there's a downturn in the economy. And in 2008, when the music stopped, there weren't enough chairs for everyone, and I was one of the people that was there standing instead of sitting down at that point in time. So I needed to find something to do. And that's not a good point in time for people, especially women of a certain age, to be looking for a job. And in this last recession, it didn't matter what your gender was. You had a problem if you were over a certain age. So I thought, I'll have to find something. I'll have to create my own job. So what I did is I came across a smart grid, which is really an excellent transition because everything that makes the grid smart is all about telecommunications. And so what I did is I wrote the dictionary. And one of the words here that I've highlighted is one that I haven't heard anyone mention today, but I think it's a common theme in everyone's story, is that you have to have resiliency. It's got to be part of your character for you to be successful. And it doesn't matter if it's personal relationships or if it's your career or it's dealing with your family or anything of that sort, but you need to have some resiliency in order to come back when the unexpected happens, and unexpected in a negative way. And this is equally true for what we need to think about for the grid itself. We've had a grid that has been, as a traditional grid, has been focused on centralized generation. Long lines of high voltage transmission grid, then lower voltage distribution grid, down to what we used to call the dumb meters. No situational awareness. This is a recipe for fragility. And the only way that any utility ever knew that there was a problem with the grid was when someone picked up the phone to say, hey, I don't have lights on at my place. Well, most businesses don't operate with that level of unawareness. So what the smart grid does is it moves things into a much more decentralized generation. Now we've heard today about solar, wind. There are all different types of solutions out there that can bring power all the way down to the distribution grid, even to the individual home level. And that's all very important. But we also are seeing a lot more solutions that are going out there to give us wide area situational awareness, or we love acronyms, we call it WASA for short. Distribution automation, smart meters, bringing a lot more data and monitoring of what's the conditions on the grid, what's the conditions at this particular point, and including smart devices in buildings. But what really makes the grid smart is not the renewables, it's not the analytics themselves, but it's how you get data and how you transport data. That is the heart of the smart grid. And that's been overlooked. A lot of the focus has been on what's going on at the edge. And I have to say, telecommunications has never been a sexy industry, but it is an absolutely vital one. And it is twinned with electricity. You can't have one, really, without the other. Although, I will have to tell you this, being in telecom for a long period of time, our old adage was, yeah, people get a little bit annoyed if they come home and the lights are off. But if they pick up the phone and they can't call someone to complain to them, now they're pissed. So that's how we always put the value of telecom versus electricity. So I've listed out some things here about what really makes the smart grid smart. And I'm going to focus in on the top two, communications. We need to see a lot more transition into IP networks, and there's still an awful lot of what we call plain old telephone service. Copper leased lines, that's out there on the utility. That's going away. The phone companies are pulling it. They're saying we're not going to support this anymore. That creates huge issues for utilities because they do a lot of what they call teleprotection, monitoring of essential gear by that means. That's got to change. We've got to come up with solutions that provide us with what I call conditional quality of service. Because we're going to have, if you think about it, all of these highways where data is running back and forth. There's going to be a lot more data on those highways, and there's going to be points of congestion. How do you make sure that the ambulances and the first responder vehicles get through on a highway? We need to figure out similar schemes so that the most important data can get through when there are conditions there where there might be a lot of data that's out there. Cybersecurity. I don't know if any of you have heard the chatter from Ted Koppel's new book, which is called Lights Out. I forget the rest of the title. But I'll tell you one thing, fear sells well because I've already experienced at least one utility that said, we're buying some research because we need to figure out what we're doing about cybersecurity. Of course, sensors and data are extremely important. The sensors are gathering the data, and then the data needs to be analyzed, but also, more importantly, needs to be managed. And so I will use terms like interoperability, standards, protocols. I'll be talking about capacity. I'll be talking about how are we going to manage all of this with a workforce where everyone's siloed. They either know electricity or they know communications, but they don't know both. And in the future, those linemen who are out there climbing up on top of poles need to understand how to troubleshoot communications gear as well as the electric delivery gear. So what we're seeing at this point in time is kind of a perfect storm because we have electric utilities facing declining revenues because electric loads are actually shrinking for the most part. But at the same point in time, telecom traffic's increasing on aging infrastructure that's in some ways very, very overloaded and just inadequate to the task. We have technology migrations where we're actually moving to newer, more sensitive gear that may not be as rugged and last as long as the old gear. The dumb meters, those electromechanical meters, last forever. The new smart meters aren't proving out to have the same life cycle so far. And then, of course, we need reskilling. What I just mentioned earlier about the linemen still holds true. So there are a number of solutions out there. And I would encourage you to think about how can you be contributing to these solutions. And we don't need everyone to be a superstar and to come up with the most amazing new algorithm or the most amazing new compression for data. But we need a lot of bright people out there that can help us start thinking about how do we get to the place we need to be. And so some of the ways that we're going to do it is, well, first and foremost, we have to have the will to, as ratepayers, to understand that there's going to be costs to this. We have to be prepared to accept the fact that those investments are going to cost something and we'll have to pay for that. We need regulators to understand that too, that there are things that they need to be able to support for utilities in terms of new services that they can offer to help them recover on all of the investments that they have to make here. But we especially need a lot of innovation in things like telecommunications network management, converged grid and network operations for a type of situational awareness that we can only dream about now. And we need more done in predictive analytics. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'll be around afterwards if you have any questions.